wanting our freedom. Only wanting freedom. Only wanting freedom. Only wanting freedom.
We've always been kind of unaffected by trends and fashions in music, really. And we've always really made the music we want to make.
Old man says you are what you wear, well, well. Holy mother, God, you got to go faster than that. Get to the top, dirty your mouth, don't cover it slow. She can turn you to stone, you better start doing it right. All I need is a TV show.
The very first album that Genesis made was actually virtually unknown as far as the music business and their later fans were concerned. They did an album called From Genesis to Revelation.
Baby, you feel so close. I wish you could see my love.
We started writing songs, and I would write with Tony and Mike and Ant were in another band so writing called The Unknown, and we'd get together for different sessions, and I think, you know, whenever you start playing music as a teenager, you know, you still stand in front of the mirror and imagine a huge audience or whatever, you know, all the fantasies are there.
I obviously felt at the time, I had confidence not in '68, but by about 1970, I felt that the group could definitely get a following. But I always thought we'd become a kind of a big underground group in England, and we'd probably last a few years, and that would be it, really.
The musical inspiration of Genesis was born out of two strands, really. There was the classical input. Tony Banks was a marvellous classical pianist. They listened to a lot of classical music. At the same time, there was the input of American soul music, which Peter Gabriel in particular was a big fan of. He loved Otis Redding. And of course, they were brought up listening to hymns, you know, the choral tradition of a public school.
Trespass came out of a period of intense writing and rehearsing that the band went through after they had decided to become a rock and roll band and left Charterhouse and got over the traumas of their first album. They settled into a country cottage in Dorking and spent 3 months writing, rehearsing, learning to play their instruments and just being together as a band.
What was important about Genesis was always the song. In the way, so you know, we tend to feel we were more like, you know, kind of more experimental pop bands, if you like. Okay, we tended to go a little bit further down a certain direction than they did, you know. But I mean, that's, you know, we'd have found that at the time a sort of, you know, more obvious comparison. Although I mean, we didn't really think we were like anybody, you know, we were more sort of more our own kind of thing.
They were an unknown band and trying to do big things, and I remember giving them a good review for their single, as I recall, in Melody Maker. So I could hear that they were doing something interesting, and but I hadn't actually seen them live at that point, so half the story was kind of missing.
We like audiences that sit down and listen to the music rather than get drunk and pick out girls and
Big ones.
big ones. Welcome to Kazuna. We like audiences that sit down and listen to us.
By this point, they had started doing gigs. They'd got away from the cottage where they'd been writing all the material, actually going out on the road and playing. And very quickly they established a rapport with a hardcore of fans who were amazed by what this band were doing, producing songs or performances like The Knife.
No disrespect to the other 3 drummers that Genesis had already had before Phil Collins came along, but he was their first proper drummer, if you like.
John Mayhew had played on the first Charisma album and done quite a good job, but they were looking, if they were going to have a change, I think they decided that it was time to make a real drastic improvement to Genesis. And as the music was becoming ever more complex and demanding, they really needed musicians who could cope with all these demands and at the same time have their own input.
You can sometimes tell a good musician from the way they sit down at their instrument before they've played a note. And that was definitely the case with Phil. He had a confidence about him.
When I first joined the band, it was I was kind of viewed as class clown, you know, because I was a kind of a scapegoat in a way, which is fine because I mean, like, drummer's role, which is what I was at the time. A drummer's role is very defining. It's like a goalkeeper. You know, I mean, it's like he's there to really present the vibe. You know, you give the band the energy with the playing on the drums and the sort of humorous and the sort of personality vibe, then the band will sort of, you know, bounce off it.
It's amazing how a bit of humour can divert a huge argument that's about to happen.
How did I join Genesis? Well, I advertised English music paper. Some people phoned me up. I went along to see them at a gig. They'd just replaced Anthony Phillips. He was on Genesis Revelation and then Trespass. They'd got a guy they weren't really happy with. They'd auditioned a lot of people and they were getting fed up, so they ended up accepting somebody they weren't really happy with. And I went to see them and I could see why they weren't happy with him. And I thought he seemed to be the weak link to me, I guess. So I did 2 weeks rehearsal with them and we played our first gig.
If Trespass was a promising album, Nursery Crime really confirmed that promise. The 3 remaining members of Genesis were joined by Steve Hackett on guitar and Phil Collins on drums. And Nursery Crime really is the result of them getting to know each other and becoming a band again.
Like an island with a hidden cage, lips and gifted child, Hermaphroditus, son of gods, so I figured their love. As the dawn creeps up the sky, the hunter caught sight of a dove in desire for conquest. He found himself within a lady not beheld before.
Because of the academic background that Genesis came from, it meant that their lyrics were less about the "she loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah," and more about the Fountain of Salmacis, maybe.
A shadow in the dark green depths disturbed a strange tranquility. The waters are disturbed.
We were one of the last bands, for instance, to come out of the club, college, university circuit. After that, it was all down as the singles started becoming very, very important. Whereas with us, we actually built up the following throughout many, many years.
I was originally a pianist, and then I got hold of a Hammond organ. And the Hammond organ was it's a great instrument, really. There's a lot you could do with it, and I used to use it to its limits. You know, every instrument I've ever had, I've always tended to put find out all its limits. With the Hammond expression, using like single draw bar sounds or big sounds or fuzz box sounds, or just using the percussion part, or switching the organ on and off. Anything you could do to it, you did it. So yes, I think in those early days, you had just as much range. It was just, within where you were. If I went back to just using Hammond now, I find it a bit restricting. But at the time, obviously, it gave a whole big area of things to do.
You had Steve Hackett's interesting little guitar fills, and Phil Collins' big band drumming with the group, bringing a sense of cohesion to the actual arrangement.
Obviously this sort of the big drum sound is something very much that kind of is Phil's thing, so we like to contrast with that,
I often go in for a lot of undistorted tones, which most guitarists won't use. Most electric guitarists will turn their amplifier full up, and they'll want that peak of distortion for just about everything that they do. Whereas I'll often rely upon fuzzbox to do that.
They really only had one song written before they started Nursery Crime, and that was The Musical Box, which really shows off Genesis's sense of drama and lyrics to very good effect, with the music mirroring the darkness of the lyrics and giving it a real impact.
The early 60s was very sort of, you started pop music kind of developed. There was only kind of one level of pop music almost, that kind of went up, and it got more and more adventurous in a sense with the Beatles and the Beach Boys and people like that, and the Move and Pink Floyd and Procol Harum of that period. And at a certain point, they started to divide into two really, and you had the kind of the simple stuff, which got simpler in the 70s, and then you got the more complicated stuff, which kind of got more complicated. And we're obviously in that second strand, really, very much a sort of live based thing. You never got played on the radio, really.
I've been waiting here so long. I don't decide to pass me by.
I was very influenced by the others because I'm, to a very large extent, I'm a fan of each of them in their own particular way. Certain things that they do, each of them have impressed me. That's really rare to find in a band whereby you're that into the other musicians.
Each gig is basically very different. You're still dealing with a different set of people, and the people, whatever they give back to you, makes you sort of go 100%. I find it very hard to do anything less than better than I did the night before, anyway. Just because to me it's like an ongoing thing. You're just trying to do it a little bit better every night.
With Watcher of the Skies and the Batwings, and I was wearing UV makeup and holding sort of UV tubes and things, and there were things which at that time hadn't really been seen in a rock context. So there was a certain shock value.
You have to sort of think of the set in the same way, dare I say, that you would titillate a woman. You know, I mean, you have to sort of, you know, you have to reach some kind of climax, hopefully.
It's important to remember that in those days, PA systems were so lousy, no one heard a word that Peter sang most of the time. So in a sense, he was trying to act out some of the characters.
So you go through all these moods and little sequences like Willow Farm, where Peter on stage used to wear a flower's head and dance about. This is when they first started using costumes to act out the drama of the music.
A flower. Willow Farm, to look for butterfly, butterfly. Open your eyes, it's full of surprise. Everyone likes the possible rock and the musical box. Yes!
Supper's Ready was a chance for Genesis to extend the concept over the 20-minute mark. And at this point, they were becoming aware of each other's styles and quirks, both in playing and writing. And they started to build these in, so that they knew what particular Steve Hackett guitar sound or Tony Banks keyboard sound would fit a particular piece that they were writing, and they could build that in.
We're growing everything. We got you in, we got you out. That's why our things floating about.
Steve Hackett's arrival in the band, he's a unique guitar player. He's not a conventional lead guitar player in the traditional blues sense. You wouldn't get long sort of Alvin Lee type I'm going home solos from Steve. He used the guitar within Genesis to create moods, to create atmosphere, and to complement the lyrics and the songs.
I have a pedal board which runs off mains instead of off batteries. I've got built in an octave divider, which gives you a lower octave, a wah-wah pedal, Crybaby, Marshall Super Fuzz, Shaftesbury Duo Fuzz, an MXR Phase 90 Shala volume pedal, Echoplex, and a guitar synthesizer called a Hi-Fly.
I mean, we tend to use instruments more for sort of like character than for sort of like, you know, soloing and things. It's never been a very big feature in Genesis. You know, if we do what you might call solos, we kind of look at them as kind of instrumentals, just like lead, you know, just like a vocal, if you like, but using the instrumental line in it because it sounds better played than the song. And I've always used echoes and choruses on all keyboards, I mean, at various times. I think they're crucial. I think all synthesized sounds in particular tend to sort of need something to sort of give them a bit of spark, because they're always a very one-dimensional thing, and you need to do something to give them a bit of space.
Supper's Ready summed up everything that Genesis was about. It was about telling a story. It was about using instruments to create moods and patterns. It was about a cohesive symphonic arrangement. So many different strands go into the creation of Supper's Ready.
Was selling England by the pound. That's what England is doing.
Selling England by the pound was the next logical step on from Foxtrot. But instead of having one colossal concept piece occupying a side of an album, instead they had a series of, if you like, mini epics. Songs like The Cinema Show, The Firth of Fifth, The Battle of Epping Forest, and Dancing with the Moonlit Night.
the Battle of Epping Forest. The marching soldiers at the beginning were done with the guitar. And that was a guitar through a fuzz box, then an octave divider. So you had the distortion from the fuzz box and the intermodulation between the strings where you weren't holding down any of the notes. So you had sort of sound. Then take it down octaves, so it was lower, so it was more like gravel, boots crunching in gravel or marching. And I had close echo on it, so that sort of doubled it, and you had a slightly out of time marching. And the idea was that it would pan in the cans from side to side. If you listen to it on cans, in fact, it goes. And that's how as it comes closer, it's like a line of soldiers coming towards you.
The Battle of Epping Forest and Dancing with the Moonlit Night were quite dense because they were trying to cram an awful lot onto them. And in some ways that seemed to constrict the drama that they were trying to portray, that when they actually got to a climax, there was so much already happening that it was difficult for the climax to stand out, if you like. Whereas with the cinema show and the Firth of Fifth, there was much more space for them to develop.
Paper late, cried a voice in the crowd. Old man dies, the note he left was signed old Father Thames. It seems he's drowned, selling England by the pound.
Sometimes you can feel as though you've run out of sounds rather than notes. A good way of disciplining yourself against that is to have what I've got, which is a nylon guitar. And I play that as much as possible at home. And I write a lot of things on that. And try and see how much is just available within one tonal range, a completely acoustic sound.
Digesting England by the pound.
Now, usually we all come in with an idea, or separately, you know. Someone comes in with an idea and we all expand upon it, and we write the words, the music, the arrangements, all democratically. So everyone does their own bits.
I can't play over everything. I see spaces where I think the guitar belongs, and that's what, you know, and I put it in there, you know. That's probably why people wish I'd played more, but it's because, you know, I can only play where I see that it seems to be right to play. I mean, I don't think it's right to play, then I don't.
It's a sort of subtle thing, you know, no one necessarily says that much about it. You just have a sort of feeling there's a lot of energy for this bit or that song, there's not so much energy for that song, so that other song sort of gets phased out. And as the album, the time you go in the studio draws near, you find you're sort of whittling it down to roughly album length.
We work on everything that we sort of collectively enjoy, I suppose, and then one or two things will fall by the wayside as you go along, you know. One always has a sneaking feeling that one or two things aren't going to make it, but you sort of, you know, you work on them anyhow to see what happens. And sometimes those things do develop into good numbers.
Selling England by the pound marked a big leap forward for Genesis in many respects. It was an album which was much better produced than the previous albums. They changed the artwork on the cover. They had a different style of look and a different sound as well. And I think the whole idea really was to propel Genesis forward towards the American market.
The way the sort of albums have gone, I mean, in America, each album kind of has kind of sold more than its predecessor. And in Europe, obviously, there have been ups and downs a little bit.
For me, the most creative album that the band did was Selling England by the Pound. Selling England by the Pound. I think that showcased both the song aspect that the band had. I think it showcased some of the playing talent in that, like, you know, occasionally the instruments were allowed to breathe. I mean, you know, unaccompanied things. Not very long, but, you know, occasionally. I think the odd solo was too long. I think Cinema Show, I mean, that keyboard solo which went on interminably on one chord in 7/8 for God knows how long, I think that was too damn long. No, apart from that, I think it showcased the individual abilities pretty nicely.
The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was scheduled to be the blockbuster. This was the album that was going to finally establish Genesis as not just a cult band playing at the local town hall, but an international group. And at the same time, it was going to be the album that would really take the basis of the group, which was creating these set-piece works like Supper's Ready, one stage further. The ultimate Supper's Ready would be The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway.
What we did with The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was something the whole band wanted to do, and it was a very kind of quite an ambitious project of a double album concept sort of thing, you know. And it gave us the freedom to do certain things within that you could do more sort of improvised passages, which we did, and just sort of mood pieces without any vocals and things like that, which was something that, you know, something which was very much part of what we wanted to do.
A guitar synthesizer called a Hi-Fly. It's excellent for little jokey sounds. I used it as a thing on Counting Out Time on the new album. People wondered what it was, if it was a synthesizer or if it was a voice or if it was a kazoo, and I said no, it was a guitar solo. This particular sound that I got, I patched up the thing, and it had a setting where you would hit a note and it would also, the actual pitch of the note, raise it above and then below. So it would be like a vibrato, ooh, ooh. And then I did it quite fast, so it's like, ooh.
We just tended to find we used weird time signatures, like back in New York City and things. And they weren't consciously weird, they just tended to be, it just tended to be how they ended up, you know. We tended to make certain, sort of, particularly when we were writing in 7 or something, sound very natural, I think.
The original recording, the original double LP, was probably done under quite difficult circumstances, in a bit of a rush, amidst lots of argument, against deadlines and pressure. And not everybody understood it, and Peter had problems trying to convince people what it was all about.
This was the first occasion on which Gabriel demanded or insisted that he should write all the lyrics, and the rest of the band were to write all the music. So the rest of the band went away and they wrote all this music, and Peter Gabriel was faffing about with the lyrics when he wasn't being lured away by promises by William Friedkin. So of course when it came to it, there was all this music and not a lot of lyrics. So when they came to put it all together, it was something of a rush.
I virtually left everything up until the last minute. I found the finalisation of my parts virtually impossible, and I was continually changing them until we recorded them. I did a lot more improvised work because of that.
I don't think that by comparison to the live performance which the band gave, that the recorded works ever came anywhere near it. I mean, and I think that the album should have been looked at far more carefully and critically, and perhaps the album sales would reflect that.
The revelation is that years later, when a live recording of The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway was issued on CD, on album, and you can hear the band playing it so much better because they've been on the road, and everything makes a lot more sense once a group has got to grips with the piece and not just reading it off in the studio, playing it for the first time.
Peter was becoming more separate from the rest of the band. He was viewed by most people as the front man, which is understandable. He was the vocalist. He was actually the only one who ever moved about on stage. The rest of them actually all sat down. That's how exciting they were. They all sat round in a semicircle on stage, and poor old Peter was stood up the front there, and he was the shy one. And he was standing there singing and feeling quite self-conscious about it, which is one of the reasons that the stage masks developed.
Some of the costumes, I think, because there's Slipper Man, who is supposed to be sort of nastily contorted by sort of, for all sorts of reasons. There's sort of great growths all over it and everything like that. It looked great, but the music was starting to become secondary, and I think that we realised we'd gone too far at that point,
No, the Slipper Man was in some respects, the last straw, the visual last straw.
I mean, there was a kind of controlled balance when Peter was a part of the band because of the fact that you had country positions assumed by two separate potential majorities. Mm-hmm. Sound like a politician, but it really is true. Now, when he left, it created an imbalance in terms of the power structure.
In terms of the actual music, it never made very much difference. I mean, apart from the fact, he was 1/5 of the band and we lost that contribution, if you like. But I mean, it just changed a bit, and that's how it is. I think it's difficult sometimes for people to see that. So the one person leaving is not as crucial as all that, unless what it tends to affect in terms of Peter leaving really was more the fact of whether the audience, having had Peter as a sort of figurehead, if you like, when you lose that, your image tends to go with him, and you just have to. You're never quite sure the audience is going to be able to sort of follow you once you've lost that side of it. But in musical terms, I think the music carried on. I mean, well, for me, it improved.
I am the voice of Britain before the Daily Express.
The band, as such, although it came out with very good things subsequently, it wasn't able to break new ground as readily because of the fact, that the people that would try and change it were kind of becoming a dying breed, should we say.
It was definitely the right thing for me to have done, and clearly it was good for them because it sort of brought Phil out front and gave everyone a bit more space, I think.
When it came to Trick of the Tail, we kind of wanted to do just a much sort of more straightforward kind of thing, and so that's what it was. And I don't really feel it would have been much different. I mean, obviously, you can never say. I mean, but I felt that whatever what we did was kind of a pretty natural sort of thing, really.
You never look for change, but when it happens, it forces us to change, and something new happens, which is not. Looking on the bright side of things, that's a good thing when you're forced to sort of reappraise and to not get stuck in a sort of certain groove.
Trick of the Tail was a forthright response to those who said that the band was finished once Peter Gabriel had left.
We did look for another singer, and having decided we weren't going to find one, we decided we would definitely try and go with Phil, because he seemed keen on the idea, which was the first thing. We didn't think originally he'd want to. He's very much a drummer, and he still probably thinks himself as a drummer, more than anything. And we just thought that he wouldn't want to not drum, and also whether he could face being out in front there all the time. But I think from the audience point of view, it was much easier for them to accept someone who came from the ranks of the group, if you like, rather than someone who came from outside, because it meant that the character of the band didn't really change.
They still had Steve Hackett with them, and Phil was now the lead singer, and they had David Henschel as their producer. And if you listen to the album now and compare it to their previous works, you can hear how the production is far superior, and we're into the mid-70s by now, and also they're creating pieces of music like Los Endos and Dance on a Volcano, which were as dramatic as in the past and as powerful, but perhaps more rock orientated in a way.
My role is definitely as a writer. I'm not a very natural performer, but in a group nowadays you've got to kind of contain
all the different aspects within the group. In the old days, I suppose there used to be writers who never performed and performers who never wrote.
Tony Banks, as the main writer at that time, was the biggest influence on the band, but his writing was in some ways beginning to become stylized and constricting. It was certainly constricting as far as Steve Hackett was concerned, because he found himself increasingly marginalized.
My real creativity was coming into play when I wasn't surrounded with other individuals all screaming at once. I find that I need a certain kind of tranquility. I don't like to write in rehearsal rooms. Now, to me, rehearsal rooms are usually too hot, too cold, too dark, too smelly. I'm sitting there, I'm facing three other guys that are at the best colleagues, at worst competitors, sitting there with knowing that when a group doesn't work, that it's diluting each one of the individual's ideas. When it does work, you know, you have the common denominator, the magic factor.
With 5 people all trying to sort of get ideas into the group, people are bound to be, a couple of people were always bound to feel that they were being sort of like, I think Steve felt very much he was always being kind of a little bit kind of, you know, squeezed out all the time, and I think that upset him slightly at times. I mean, you know, which is fair. I mean, to some extent he was occasionally, I suppose, you know, but and I thought the best things he ever did with Genesis, actually, there were on the album Wind and Wuthering, which was the last album he was with us.
Wind and Wuthering was definitely a progression from A Trick of the Tail. But in some ways it also showed up that the direction now in which Genesis were heading was something of a cul-de-sac.
There's some very nice pieces on Wind and Wuthering, like Blood on the Rooftops and In Your Own Special Way, which is a really nice ballad that Phil sings with great feeling. Unfortunately for Genesis, it came out at an odd time in the state of the music industry. It's 1977, which was the year of the Sex Pistols and then later the Clash, punk rock. And the whole kind of basis of what we've known as rock music for the last 7 or 8 years was overturned overnight. There was a revolution going on.
Personally, if I look back to the last 2 albums that the band done, I wouldn't necessarily say that the selection of material which went on it was entirely in accordance with my own views as to what was outstanding and what wasn't.
Wind and Wuthering was the trigger that caused Steve Hackett to leave the band. He felt that the band should be more democratic, if you like, in their songwriting and how the songs were allocated to an album.
I think having been through it with Peter 2 years before, when Steve left, it was kind of like, I mean, we always anticipated Steve leaving. I thought he would leave earlier than he did in a way. Yeah. And it wasn't, for us, a particularly big thing. I mean, in both cases, the members were sort of obviously not too happy with being in the group situation. Mm-hmm. And so when each time the person left, it was kind of like a freedom, you know, in a way. And particularly when we went down to a 3-piece, there's something about being a 3-piece that is a very natural thing for us, I think.
Big thing is that I was told, don't be an naughty boy and just jolly well get on with being a part of the group, and we don't want you to do solo albums, you know, not even in your spare time. So We had a lot of meetings and discussions and arguments, and the whole thing became so crammed and so tedious. There was only one course that I could follow. I mean, after you've done one album yourself, which you're very pleased with and has sold well, and you know, you created an audience for yourself, there's no way that you're suddenly going to take a step back and assume less responsibility. I've always wanted to work at my full potential. That's hard to do in a band when only a percentage is required.
Steve had felt that it was time to insert his musical personality in a more freer way, have his own bands, make his own solo albums. He needed to do that, and he'd given Genesis an enormous amount, I think. You know, his quirky guitar playing, all his original licks and sound effects, and you know, the way he would blend with Mike Rutherford on acoustic guitars, all those things were invaluable, really, in the story of the band. But they were moving into a new era, a new age.
I suppose the people who've left have been the easiest to replace, in a funny way, because we had another singer in the group and we had another guitarist in the group. Those, in a sense, they're always where. I mean, obviously Peter was the major singer, but Phil always did sing on Genesis albums. And in terms of guitar, well, Mike always did. I mean, he was doing 50% of the guitar anyhow. I mean, he was always doing all the rhythm guitar parts, always. It's a question whether we'd get the hang of lead, you know.
5 people, as we were when we started, developing as sort of personalities, expanding as writers and musicians, need more room. And we could barely contain 5, and now then we were 4 for a while, and they kind of developed, and you could barely contain that. And now there's 3 of us, and there's a lot more room for each person to breathe and move in, which I think is actually a secret. In a group where everyone writes, it is a problem. 3 is quite a good number.
We still enjoy playing together, so that's one of the reasons why we're staying together. Really.
Get out of the way, fat man. You got something to do. Go fill up your hands. Or to their shine back up at you. Well, you gotta get out while there's gold in the air. Oh, it's falling like water, and it's running down from your skin. No, no, no.
Well, I like to think that I inspired the title of the next Genesis album, which was "And Then There Were 3", because that was the headline in Melody Maker when I reported that Steve Hackett had left the band, and now Genesis were Phil Collins, Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford.
They didn't replace Steve Hackett. They didn't really seem that bothered by his departure. They simply carried on with the format that they believed was right. And the songs were mainly split between Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford.
And then there were 3, which included a lot of songs I wrote on my own. Pretty much a sort of like a solo album by half and half, Mike and myself, really. And there were a couple of group songs, but it really came mainly from Mike and I. And of course that did so well. And then Mike and I both put out solo albums just after that, and they both did nothing, you know.
In a way, Genesis always relish these challenges. They always want to show everybody that they can not just survive, but come back with something even bigger and better. And their albums by now were selling far more than any of the early so-called classic albums.
In sheer commercial terms, of course, And Then There Were 3 was probably the biggest kind of quantum leap we ever had between 2 albums. Between that and Winter Mothering, it was probably the biggest difference of all albums. And I think that was obviously the presence of the single Body You Follow Me on it, which did do something a lot of places.
Okay, I'm ready. Hey, I'm good, boy. Hey.
Basically, the band is a band of composers, and if a song feels good, 3 minutes long, then we'll leave it at 3 minutes, you know, because there are some things you just can't stretch out for the sake of it. You know, it just feels right at that length. And so therefore you'll leave it at that length. I mean, Follow You, Follow Me, which is, I mean, if you ask our ardent fans what they think of it, they'll say, oh, it's the group single. You know, it's obviously a commercial single, but I mean, to me, that's one of the hippest things we've ever done. You know, and I mean, the way it was written was because it was out of improvisation. It was a blow, basically. And it just sort of honed itself into this sort of verse, chorus, verse, chorus, chorus, verse. You know, and the attitude behind it was totally, you know, on the level. But I mean, to the punters, I suppose they sort of see it as their band trying to get a hit single. You know, we've never really needed that. I mean, in America, you need that.
All I need is a TV show, that and the radio. Down on my luck again, down on my luck again. I can show you some of the people in my life. I can show you some of the people in my life. It's driving me mad.
I suppose Duke was actually a bit of a shock for long-term die-hard Genesis fans, because this really did make a big jump, a big change in their production, in their choice of songs, choice of material, general mood, the whole piece. It was a far cry from the kind of gothic darkness of Trespass or Nursery Crime. But then you couldn't expect them to carry on doing that kind of thing ad infinitum, especially not in the changed world of the early 80s.
Turn It On Again, Duchess and Behind the Lines are all great examples of the new spirit of co-writing that was going on in Genesis, and it opened up a whole range of possibilities for them.
She never thought about the future. She just did what she would. All that she really cared about her music. We all seem so important then. But she dreamed of the time when she performed, when everyone would cry for more.
The songs kind of evolve in the studio very much. When we've got something which we know the form of the song, we just go in the studio, put it down with a rhythm machine, like most of the time now. And then what we do is we just put it down roughly I'll play something, Michael plays something, Phil will play something, probably sing actually a little bit, just go la la or whatever, even if it's not the right vocal, just something to give an idea where the vocal's going to be. And the rhythm machine, and then we'll take what we'll do is we'll then start again. With the rhythm machine, we'll probably start by putting on the drums, and then we put on maybe a real basic keyboard of some kind, you know, and a basic guitar, and then we sort of build the song up slowly like that.
It wasn't a sellout, they weren't trying to copy what was going on in the charts, yet they absorbed all these new influences, you know, the powerful new drum sound, the new keyboards, the new technology, a better production, and much tighter, shorter pieces of music. And Turn It On Again, which was one of the highlights of the album, was a big hit single, of course. And yet there's a kind of Tamla Motown feel too, and so in a way you're hearing Phil Collins expressing vocally within Genesis also the kind of music that he would develop aside from that with his solo career, which took off around the same time.
We make a lot of use of kind of cheap compressors when using Phil's voice. It's the way we get the kind of edge on his voice. What they did was they're very kind of very crude. They had no kind of nice curve. They just when they'd hear the sound, they would let the first bit escape, and then there'd be a sudden massive cut off like that. So what happens if you sort of went sort of like cat, and you get incredible coming out like that. And if you listen to the songs, you will hear that as being the character of it, and you get this incredible sort of the way the vocals are almost spat out.
And significantly, Phil Collins also suddenly showed that he was up there with the other two when it came to writing. He wrote Misunderstanding, that became their first big American hit and really set them on the path for the future.